All right, let's dive in. Today we're going to be exploring these things called voltage-gated potassium channels. They sound kind of complicated, but trust me, they're super important.
Yeah, they really are.
We've got this scientific text here, and we're going to use it to kind of break down why these little channels are essential for like pretty much everything in our bodies. We're talking heartbeats, brain function, and even, get this, skin color.
It's amazing how something so small can have such a big impact, right?
Right, absolutely. So maybe we should start with like what these voltage-gated potassium channels actually are. What are they all about?
Well, you can think of them as like tiny little gatekeepers on our cell membranes.
Okay.
They control the flow of these things called potassium ions, and potassium ions are really important for how our cells talk to each other.
So potassium ions, why are those so crucial for this whole communication system going on in our cells?
Think of a cell like a tiny battery.
Okay.
It's got a positive and negative pole, right?
Yeah.
And that difference in electrical charge is what we call resting potential.
Gotcha.
Potassium ions are super important for keeping that resting potential stable. They make sure the cell is ready to fire when it gets a signal.
So it's like, it's all about maintaining that balance.
Exactly. It's like a reset button. But it's not just about having enough potassium, it's about controlling how it flows.
So that's where these voltage-gated potassium channels, or VGKCs, come in.
Right.
Okay.
They're like the gatekeepers, carefully controlling how much potassium goes in and out of the cell.
That makes sense. So any disruptions in that flow?
Oh, that can lead to all sorts of problems. Seizures, heart arrhythmias, you name it.
It's kind of scary to think about how something so small can mess things up so badly.
It is, yeah. It's really fascinating, though, when you think about it.
Right, it's mind-blowing. But, I mean, if every cell has these channels, how come some cells seem to be more affected by, like, these electrical disruptions?
That's a great question. And the answer is actually pretty cool. There are actually many different types of VGKCs.
Really?
Yeah. It's not just one type fits all. It's a whole family of them. And they have, like, different jobs and different properties depending on where they are in the body.
So, like, some are faster, some are slower.
Exactly. Some are super fast, like in your neurons, where you need really rapid signaling.
Yes.
And then others are, like, way slower and more sustained, which is important for things like your heartbeat.
Okay, so it's not just about the potassium itself. It's about these specific channels and how they work. Wow, this is starting to feel like a whole new world inside our cells.
It really is. And the more we learn about these VGKCs, the more we're finding out just how much they influence our biology. Like, did you know that they've even been linked to skin pigmentation?
Wait, skin color
Okay.
and potassium channels. What's the connection there? I thought that was all about melanin.
Well, yeah, melanin is the pigment that gives our skin its color.
Right.
But it turns out that potassium channels actually play a role in regulating the cells that make melanin, the melanocytes. Researchers are still trying to figure out exactly how it all works, but it seems like the flow of potassium ions through these channels can, like, affect how much melanin these cells produce.
Wow, so even something as visible as our skin color is connected to these, like, tiny electrical conversations going on in our cells. It's wild.
It really is. It just shows you how interconnected everything is.
Yeah. This is making me think about my body in a whole new way. It's like, it's not just organs and tissues. It's this, like, whole symphony of electrical signals happening at the cellular level. And these VGKCs are, like, conducting the whole thing.
That's a great way to put it. It's like an orchestra with all these different instruments playing their parts. And speaking of orchestrating, let's talk about what roles these channels actually play in shaping those electrical signals.
Okay, yeah, let's get into that.
One of the most important functions is repolarization.
Repolarization.
Yeah. Basically, that's the process that brings the cell back to its resting state after it's fired off a signal. Without it, the cell wouldn't be able to fire again.
Ah, so it's like a gun jamming if you don't reset it after firing.
Exactly. You need to, like, reload to fire again. So
Yeah.
it's not just about triggering the signal. It's about making sure the system can reset so it can fire again and again.
That makes sense. But if potassium is always flowing, wouldn't that make the cell, like, unresponsive?
Yeah.
How does it stay balanced?
Well, that's the voltage-gated part of the name.
Yeah.
These channels are super sensitive to changes in the electrical environment around them.
Right.
When a signal comes along, it causes a change in that electrical potential, and that triggers certain VGKCs to open,
Got it.
and that allows potassium ions to flow out, which helps to restore the resting state.
So they're, like, constantly monitoring and responding to make sure everything stays in balance.
Exactly. They're like tiny little sensors, always adjusting to keep things running smoothly.
But what about the speed? What determines how quickly they open and close?
Ah, that's another key part of the story.
Okay.
The speed, or the gating kinetics as it's called, that can really influence how the electrical signal behaves.
Hmm.
It's not just on or off, it's more like a dimmer switch with lots of different settings. And all sorts of things can affect it. Voltage changes, signaling molecules, even temperature.
So it's not just the potassium itself. It's the type of channel, where it is, and what's going on around it. It's amazing how complex this all is.
Right, it's this whole intricate interplay of factors that makes our cellular communication system so incredibly sophisticated.
Okay, this is all starting to click. But I'm really curious to hear more about those different subfamilies of VGKCs. And I also want to know more about how scientists are trying to target these channels for therapies, especially for things like epilepsy and heart arrhythmias.
Those are great questions.
But I think we need a little break to process all of this before we dive into that.
Yeah, that sounds good.
We'll be back in a jiffy to explore all of that. Stay with us.
Welcome back. We were talking about all the different types of voltage-gated potassium channels, remember?
Yeah. It's like a whole toolkit, right?
Exactly, a toolkit for our cells.
And each one with its own special function. I'm ready to dive into that toolkit.
All right, let's start with the KV family.
KV.
Yeah, it stands for voltage-gated potassium channel. It's a pretty big family, over 40 different members.
Wow, 40. That's a lot of channels.
Yeah, and each one has its own, personality, its own set of properties. Some of them are responsible for, like, quickly resetting the cell after it fires a signal. Remember, repolarization.
Right. Like hitting the reset button so it can fire again.
Exactly. Those are like the sprinters of the potassium channel world.
Okay, I like that analogy. The sprinters. Quick and efficient.
Yeah. And then there are other KV channels that are more like pacemakers. They help to regulate how often the cell fires.
Oh, they're like setting the tempo.
Yeah.
The drummers of the orchestra.
Exactly. Sprinters and drummers all working together. And then we have another important family, the KCNQ channels.
KCNQ. What do those do?
Those are super important in the heart.
The heart. Okay, so these are getting serious now.
They are. These channels are crucial for making sure your heart beats in a nice, steady rhythm.
Oh, so if they don't work properly.
Yeah, that's when you can get problems like arrhythmias.
Arrhythmias, that's when your heart beats too fast or too slow, right?
Right, or irregularly. And it can be really dangerous, even life-threatening sometimes. So understanding how these KCNQ channels work is a big deal for developing treatments.
I see what you mean. It's all about that precise control over repolarization, huh?
Yeah, it's all connected.
So researchers are looking for ways to, like, fix these channels when they go wrong?
Exactly. They're working on drugs that can target specific potassium channels.
But wait, how do they do that? I mean, these channels are everywhere in the body. How do they make sure the drugs only affect the ones they're trying to target?
That's the tricky part. It's one of the biggest challenges in drug development. You got to be really precise like a surgeon. You want to make sure you're only hitting the right target and not messing with other important channels.
That sounds super complicated. Like trying to hit a bullseye on a target the size of a pinhead.
Something like that. But if they can figure it out, the potential is huge.
Yeah, it could revolutionize how we treat all sorts of diseases.
Yeah.
That's amazing. But okay, before we get too carried away, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier. Those firing patterns.
Oh, yeah, the firing patterns.
Right. How does the flow of potassium actually, like, sculpt those patterns? How does it affect the rhythm and timing of the electrical signals?
Great question. Remember we talked about how different VGKCs open and close at different speeds?
Yeah, the gating kinetics.
Right. That variability is what makes all the difference. It's what gives the electrical signals their character.
Okay, so it's not just the signals themselves, it's the timing of those signals.
Exactly. Some channels open really fast and then close again quickly.
Okay.
And that creates a short burst of potassium flow.
Got it.
And then other channels open more slowly and stay open longer.
Okay.
So you get a more sustained flow.
Interesting. So it's like different combinations of these channels create all these different patterns.
Exactly. And those patterns are what make everything work. The rapid firing of neurons, the steady beat of your heart. It's all thanks to the intricate dance of potassium ions in these amazing channels.
Wow. This is making me appreciate the complexity of our bodies in a whole new way. It's like there's a whole symphony happening inside us, and these potassium channels are conducting the whole thing.
It really is a beautiful symphony. And it's not just about keeping time. It's about all the subtle variations and nuances that allow our bodies to adapt and respond to the world around us. Like, think about your brain.
Okay.
Different patterns of neuronal firing create our thoughts, our emotions, our memories. everything.
That's incredible. So these tiny little channels are involved in, like, everything.
Pretty much, and we're still just scratching the surface. Like, recent research has shown that they play a role in the immune system, inflammation, even cell growth.
Whoa, right?
It's a huge field,
Right.
and there's so much more to discover.
This is mind-blowing. I had no idea potassium channels were involved in so much. It really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does, and it makes you realize how much we still don't know.
I feel like we've just scratched the surface today. But I think my brain needs a little break to process all of this.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
We'll be back in a jiffy to wrap things up. Stick with us. Welcome back. I feel like my brain is still buzzing from all that potassium channel talk.
I know, right? It's amazing stuff.
It really is. So before we go, any final thoughts on these incredible little gatekeepers?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that even though we can't see them, they're working constantly.
Yeah, behind the scenes.
Keeping our cells balanced, our brains firing, our hearts beating, all thanks to these tiny channels controlling the flow of potassium. It really makes you appreciate the complexity of the human body.
It does. It's like we take it for granted, but there's so much going on at the microscopic level that we never even think about.
Exactly. And the more we learn about it, the more amazing it becomes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been another fascinating deep dive.
It has.
Thanks for joining us today, and until next time, keep exploring.